Video to our monitors takes us to this next story about a deadline looming for the Israeli military to withdraw from Lebanon. So this is under a ceasefire deal with the Hezbollah militant group. But the Israeli military now says it's going to leave troops in 5 strategic locations in this area past the deadline, which is, by the way, tomorrow. This comes as today marks 500 days of war between Israel and Hamas. And right now, a bipartisan group of U.S. senators are in Israel as questions still remain about the current fragile ceasefire and hostage release deal. So let's bring in CBS News contributor Robert Berger, who's joining us now from Jerusalem. Robert, President Trump has really pitched the idea of turning Gaza into a project development, something he says could be a crown jewel for the Middle East. Is this really viable when you consider the fact that there are 2 million Palestinians who may or may not want to be moved off of land they consider theirs?
It's really, the consensus is that this is not viable. If you talk to observers or you talk to the people in the Arab world, leaders of the Arab world have come out strongly against this. They call it ethnic cleansing, a war crime. And Egypt and Jordan, the 2 countries that President Trump hopes will take in hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, say that they can't do it for ideological reasons, economic reasons. And so you'd have to say it isn't viable. But if you ask the Israeli government, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described it as a remarkable idea that should be pursued. One idea that's being talked about in the Israeli government is the idea of voluntary relocation. In other words, the Palestinians who want to leave Gaza, and there may be quite a large number, that they should be allowed to leave.
Okay, so we also know that this is playing out while the leader of Saudi Arabia is in Washington, D.C. How could those talks be a part of shaping this future?
Well, President Trump's bigger plan is to bring Saudi Arabia into the fold of the Abraham Accords that were reached back in President Trump's first term. So the bigger picture from the point of view of President Trump is to get the Saudis on board and have a broader peace in the Middle East that would include, that would be led by Saudi Arabia, and also resolving the Gaza problem. But you know, the Gaza problem is really, it's a wrench in this idea, because what are you going to do about Gaza? President Trump's idea of moving out 2 million Palestinians simply isn't going to fly, but perhaps it's an opening part of a negotiation, and now the president is waiting for the Arab world to come up with some ideas of their own.
Well, and being right in every line is super important to this broadcast and all broadcasts at CBS. I have to correct myself. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, is in Saudi Arabia. The meeting is not happening in Washington, D.C., just to be very clear about that. But we also know that talks are underway, some really important talks regarding phase 2 of the ceasefire and hostage release deal. What do we know about the viability of a permanent ceasefire? Because we're still in phase 1 of that agreement, hoping that we get to phase 2.
Yeah, well, phase 2, there's only been really opening ideas about phase 2. Actually, we're still in phase 1, and the Israelis are focusing on that. We're supposed to see the release of another 14 hostages over the next 2 weeks as part of phase 1, 6 living hostages and 8 dead. Now, phase 2 is a lot more complicated because it foresees an end to the war. And that is a problem for Israel. That's, of course, what Hamas wants, a complete end to the war. The Israelis are reluctant to go along with that because Hamas is still in power in Gaza. So we're just starting negotiations on phase 2, but it's going to be tough to get that deal.
Robert Berger, always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, streaming on CBS News 24/7.